I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. The week of August 13th, 2024, Tropical Storm Debby brought needed rain to the DMV, which has been on drought watch, but then flooded the low-lying areas of Old Town Alexandria by the Kennedy Center and the Watergate Building in Washington, D.C., and Dock Street in Annapolis. The National Education Association, the largest union in the country, headquartered in Washington, D.C., is now in its sixth week of locking out its own staff. The Mayor and Council of the City of Rockville ended discussion on a new rent stabilization bill, prompting a council member to pen an op-ed about how he changed his mind on the issue. Montgomery County Public Schools welcomes 42 special education teachers from the Philippines, the first big batch hire for MCPS, and more. Stay with us.
Rainbows through a sock, thinking that they might try to pick the lock that keeps this city shut. How are those kids?
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program. If your goal is to make a meaningful impact with a career in local, state, or federal government, discover what this degree can do for you. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from the Silver Spring power pop band, The Airport 77s, Andy Sullivan on vocals and guitar, Chuck Dolan on bass, and John Kelly on drums. The songs come from their album, We Realize You Have a Choice.
They be thinking about that moment till the very last breath, singing those postcard blues. Do you love me? I need to know for sure, 'cause I'm dying out here waiting for the cure. Do you love me? Do you remember my face since the circus left town?
For much of the spring and summer this year, the Washington, D.C. region has been short on rain. On July 3rd, the city's drinking water reservoir ran low, raising water quality concerns, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers issued a boil advisory for D.C. and Arlington County. The boil advisory was lifted within 24 hours, but a couple of weeks later, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments announced a drought watch and called on residents to voluntarily reduce water consumption. Tropical Storm Debby was going to bring rain, we knew that, but it weakened and the region got between 2 and 4 inches. Not an extraordinary storm by any measure. And yet, it flooded low-lying areas of Old Town Alexandria, by the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and Dock Street in Annapolis. Here is Jeremy Cox, a reporter for Chesapeake Bay Journal and the host of Chesapeake Uncharted podcast.
We were talking double digits, inches of rainfall in places like South Carolina and, the western side of Florida. In our area, we saw between 2 and 4 inches. Some places maybe just a little bit, like Reisterstown got a little bit more than 4 inches of rain. We kind of got spared a bit with Debby compared to how it could have been.
Where was it worst?
Certainly in that area, kind of between the Piedmont of Maryland and Virginia and I-95, along the waterfront in Annapolis, along Dock Street.
Alexandria in Virginia flooded pretty badly, I thought.
Another place where they're right on the water there on the Potomac. and that city has been working on through the Alex Renew project, fixing its long-standing problems with sewage overflows, because they're like a lot of cities that are older. Its sewage system and its stormwater system are one and the same. So when there's too much stormwater, then it combines and with the sewage, and you get these backflows. DC, they recently went through a big dig there to kind of divert their stormwater, and that's basically what they're doing now in Alexandria, rather, is digging some new tunnels to help deal with this in the future. But in the time being, yes, unfortunately, this kind of rainfall is going to create problems with sewage and stormwater, and not that you weren't staying out of the river before, but you really want to stay out of the river right now.
You said we were spared, so we got 4 inches of rain. We could have been 10.
Right.
I understand if we flood at 10, but if we are flooding at 4, I mean, that seems a very low threshold.
You're absolutely right. A lot of these antiquated stormwater systems in the middle of these towns, they just weren't built to handle this kind of rainfall that we're seeing nowadays. We're seeing heavier rains, more frequent rainfall, and it's really pushing these, as I said, antiquated systems past the breaking point.
This photographer in Annapolis, Jay Fleming, whose work on flooding was exhibited and the gallery flooded?
Right. It was very meta there. I've interviewed Jay for my podcast, Chesapeake Uncharted. He had a display of his own work on there on exhibit there on Dock Street. Images of the bay, images of the Chesapeake Bay, kind of idyllic images. I imagine there were some flooding images as well. And here it became a work of art in kind of the wrong way, where water came into the gallery, and from his social media post, there he is posing in, knee waders with water up to his knees, in fact, and his photographs behind him.
Jeremy Cox, thank you.
You're welcome.
The National Education Association, NEA, the largest union in the United States, has locked out its own employees in Washington, D.C. for 6 weeks now. The NEA has not been able to conclude a new contract with its own union, the NEA Staff Organization, since April 2024. The NEA Staff Union then acted in unfair labor practice strike, a legal term which stops retaliatory action, including at the NEA's big convention in June, where President Biden was supposed to speak. Biden canceled after learning about the strike and did not cross the picket line. The NEA leadership locked out its 300 employees in its Washington, D.C. headquarters.
My name is Kate Hiltz, and previously in my day job, I was a digital strategist for the National Education Association, but these days I'm a full-time union member with NEASO or NISO.
How many employees are affected?
About 300 people are currently locked out of work.
Which means that you're not being paid.
Correct. I actually just today got my second $0 pay stub in the mail.
So can you apply for unemployment at this time?
Actually, many of us have tried to apply for unemployment. We've heard, however, that the unemployment office has been in contact with NEA and they're trying to deny us our unemployment, even though in the District of Columbia, we should be allowed to be able to access unemployment insurance while being locked out. That is the law.
What is NEA's position right now?
They maintain that they need to reach a successor agreement with us before ending the lockout. And we continue to bargain with them. We're in federal mediation with them. I think we're about to enter week 4 of federal mediation.
A union locking out its own employees is a little bit ironic. How are you dealing with it?
Ironic, I would say, just begins to scratch the surface. I mean, we have not found any evidence that a union has ever done this before. It's likely that it is historically unprecedented. In fact, lockouts are extremely rare. And the employers who commit lockouts are the Walmarts and Boeings of the world. I mean, it's the bottom of the barrel, worst record employers. I worry for NEA, frankly, about recovering its reputation. When we eventually do get back in the building, us as staff have to negotiate on behalf of NEA members at their bargaining tables. How can we possibly do that when NEA has so tarnished its own reputation within the labor movement?
Are there any people crossing the picket line at this point?
Unfortunately, yes. As NEA's operations start to fall apart and websites go down and events get canceled and NEA is trying to meet deadlines and put out communications, they have been hiring contractors to scab. They've been taking their existing contractors and expanding their scopes and adding on new contracts in order to have them scab bargaining unit work. They're having managers do bargaining unit work. They are contacting NISO members who have recently retired to ask them to scab. They're contacting NEA members to ask them to do scab work, affiliate members to ask them to do scab work. It is really egregious and abysmal. Luckily, however, we have been, in contact with some of those people to reject the offers or pull out of the agreements as they're happening. Once, NEA doesn't want to inform these people what's going on. They don't contact them and say, would you like to scab? They contact them with a project or with a contract offer without telling them the full situation.
Kate Hills, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
In other labor news, the faculty at Howard Community College in Maryland have unionized and joined the SEIU Local 500. As housing costs have increased, local jurisdictions in the Washington, D.C. region are coming around to some form of rent stabilization, responding to public demand, despite economic research showing negative impacts on supply of new housing units necessary to bring enduring price stability in the market. In Rockville, after considerable debate over the merits and disadvantages of rent stabilization, the mayor and council formally decided to end discussion on a possible new rent law on July 29th, which prompted councilmember David Miles to write an op-ed in the Baltimore Sun on how he went from being opposed to rent stabilization to now supporting some form of price control. Here, he picks up the story in 2023, when the Rockville City Council wrote to the Montgomery County City Council opposing a county-wide rent stabilization law, which has since passed.
When we, as a previous mayor and council, were trying to determine how to, or even whether to send a letter to the county council as they were going to discuss rent stabilization, I think what ultimately became Montgomery County Bill 1523, we thought, and I thought, based on our voluntary rent guideline, which capped rents at 6%, that perhaps that was sufficient. Or I was a little bit myopic into thinking that what we had was good. At the time, I believe the average rental increase in Rockville between 2000 and 2020 was 2.1%, so well below that 6% cap. Subsequent data, as we came out of the pandemic, we started to see near runaway inflation in many sectors, and housing was one of those sectors. The short answer to your question is data, having data and recognizing that some of these increases in rent were being experienced even by city employees who live steps away from City Hall. And then the other major point is the work of my colleague, Councilmember Isla Shaw. She is the only renter serving in mayor and council who has done tireless work over the years, and even just very simply increasing voter engagement among people who rent, and then empowering them to share their stories with us. Our coalition has done a lot of education to me and my colleagues on the issue, and that's one of the other points that pushed me over. And I was posing something that I really didn't understand. The more I learned about it, the more it made sense.
Where are you getting your data?
So that's Montgomery County's director of the Department of Housing. Essentially, there only 25% of people who rent in the county experience rental increases of 6 or more percent per year. Although 75% of people are not affected, that leaves 25%. So 1 in 4 people are experiencing rent increases of 6 or more percent.
When you signed the letter last year in 2023 against rent stabilization in the county, was this information not available to you?
It may have been available. I did not actively seek it, and that's on me. So it was at the end of the meeting. There was a lot of pressure to do it then. And in retrospect, we should just postpone having discussion. We should not have been compelled to sign on something just because it was presented.
But who compelled you?
I think there were a couple members of the mayor and council at the time that wanted to push to have something on the record.
What specifically in rent stabilization law would you do to balance the interests of the residents seeing, high rent increases and trying to incentivize private developers to build more? Because the argument is that if you have rent control, private developers are disincentivized from building more.
And that goes to some of the other ways to address housing affordability. That's thinking about our permitting process. How can we make it more efficient? Minimizing parking requirements as appropriate. There can be other sort of payment in lieu of taxes, put money in our housing opportunities fund.
All of those 4 ways, Montgomery County as a county has tried. And some of them very successfully so. But the difficulty Montgomery County has had is in scaling up and really are not making a dent on the supply, on the bigger supply question. That has to come from private developers.
Regionally speaking, if you have PG County doing it, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, DC, builders are going to build. They're going to figure out a way to build. They're not going to keep their money in their pockets. I'm not worried that there will be zero building.
So if the entire region has rent stabilization, then there is no place for builders to go but to a rent stabilized jurisdiction.
Right. And again, I don't know what ours would look like in Rockville, but there are exemptions.
David Miles, thank you for explaining the evolution of your thinking.
Oh, thanks for holding me accountable, as you always do. I appreciate it, Professor.
"42 newly arrived Filipino special education teachers are starting their new staff orientation in Montgomery County Public Schools this week. MCPS has long had a big shortage of special education staff, even before the pandemic, but now especially after. And this is the first major batch hire from a foreign country in recent history. The prospect of hiring overseas has been floating in MCPS for some time, but now this group has finally arrived. The new teachers have been assigned to several schools around the county. MCPS teachers have gotten together to help the newly arrived teachers settle in, offering furniture and donated items so that they can begin to set up their new lives. 2 years ago, County Executive Mark Elrich and MCPS together announced a $160 million deal to buy 326 electric buses, making MCPS's Department of Transportation one of the largest electric bus fleets in the country. That deal has fizzled out. The vendor, Highland Electric, has told MCPS that it will not be able to deliver. And MCPS has ordered $14 million worth of diesel buses to replace aging fleet. Now, the Montgomery County Inspector General has issued a report that says that MCPS handled the contract poorly as well. MCPS did not force the vendor into compliance or penalize them for delayed delivery of buses, and then did not hold the vendor responsible for mechanical failures of the electric buses, which made them inoperable for long periods of time. Many public transportation fleets have faced similar supply challenges in moving to electric, but equally, MCPS's contract management process has long been in question. The Department of Transportation leadership, which concluded the contract, has been previously charged with corruption. Purdue Farms, the Salisbury-based poultry company, has reached a $12 million settlement with Maryland Department of the Environment over air pollution violations at its soybean processing plant, including the accumulation of harmful ground-level ozone. The Clean Air Act created a state-based system of permits designed to limit ground-level ozone, and Purdue did not have permits for certain equipment, leading to pollution. Less than $500,000 of the money goes to the city of Salisbury, where the plant is based. The distribution of penalties between state and local and sometimes federal authorities can be surprisingly lopsided. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producer, Adama Gay, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from the Silver Spring Power Pop Band, The Airport 77s, Andy Sullivan on vocals and guitar, Chuck Dolan on bass, and John Kelly on drums. The songs come from their album, We Realize You Have a Choice.